How did Iran go from being one of America's close allies to their most determined adversary? What happened? What changed? Today, we talk about two countries that were once partners, two powers that shook hands, traded weapons, shared strategy, and stood on the same side. But then something broke. A coup, a king, a revolution, a hostage crisis, sanctions, secret operations, missiles, proxies, nuclear fear. And now, in April 2026, after weeks of direct fighting, failed talks, a fragile ceasefire, and a new US blockade targeting Iranians, the world is once again asking the same question. How did America and Iran get here? Because this hatred did not begin yesterday. This war did not appear out of nowhere. And to understand what may happen next, we first have to go back to when the United States and Iran were not enemies at all. They were friends. There was a time when Iran was not seen in Washington as a threat, but as a valuable partner. During the Cold War, Iran sat in a very important position. It bordered the Soviet Union. It was rich in oil. It connected the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Gulf. For American leaders, Iran was not just another country, it was a strategic prize. And for Iran's ruler, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, America was not just a foreign power, it was a protector, an arms supplier, and a powerful friend. Official US historical records from the 1960s show just how close the relationship was. In one conversation, the US Secretary of State said that America and Iran were, in a very real sense, partners. The Shah is described as clearly dedicated to the US-Iran alliance. That tells you something important. These two states were not drifting apart in those years. They were closely tied together. To many in Washington, Iran under the Shah was a pillar of stability. To many in Tehran's ruling circles, America was the power that helped keep that system alive. But beneath that partnership, anger was growing. And that anger came from a wound that many Iranians never forgot. A wound from 1953. Before the revolution, before the embassy crisis, before the chance of death to America, there was Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh became famous for one big reason. He moved to nationalize Iran's oil industry. At the time, Britain had enormous control over Iranian oil through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Many Iranians believed their country's wealth was being taken while ordinary people remained poor. So when Mossadegh pushed back, many Iranians saw him as a nationalist hero. But Britain saw him as a threat, and soon the United States did too. Official US historical documents now leave little doubt about what happened behind the scenes. One State Department record says the British wanted to attempt a coup in Iran to replace the Mossadegh government with one that would be more reliable, and that British and American intelligence agencies had already begun preliminary discussions. That is one of the most important moments in modern Iranian history. Office of the Historian. In August 1953, Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah, who had briefly fled, returned stronger. To many Americans at the time, this was seen as a Cold War success. To many Iranians, it became proof that the United States did not support their democracy when democracy threatened Western interests. And that is the first great fracture in the story. Because from the American side, the argument was strategic. Protect Iran from instability, communist influence, and Western loss of access. But from the Iranian nationalist side, the memory was darker. When Iranians tried to control their own future, foreign powers crushed it. That memory did not disappear. It stayed alive in speeches, in political movements, and in the minds of the young. Even decades later, the 1953 coup remained one of the biggest reasons many Iranians distrusted the United States. It created the belief that behind every American promise there might be another hidden hand, and once distrust enters a relationship, even friendship begins to feel dangerous. After the 1953 coup, the Shah grew powerful. He ruled with backing from the United States. Iran received military support, political backing, and international legitimacy. It became a regional ally of Washington. In Cold War strategy, this mattered deeply. America wanted a reliable anti-Soviet partner in the region, and Iran fit that role. US records from the 1960s and 1970s reflect how much strategic value Washington placed on the alliance and on Iran's military development. The Shah also wanted to transform Iran. He pushed modernization, he expanded the military, he promoted grand national ambition. He wanted Iran to look strong, modern, advanced, and respected. To some Iranians, especially sections of the urban middle and upper classes, this period brought development and opportunity, but to many others, it brought a different reality: political repression, growing inequality, cultural tension, and fear. The Shah's security state became notorious. Critics, dissidents, Islamists, leftists, and nationalists all developed grievances. Some believed Iran was losing its soul, others believed it was losing its freedom. Some saw the Shah as too close to America. Others saw him as a ruler surviving not because the people loved him, but because powerful outsiders supported him. This is where the friendship between the US government and the Iranian monarchy became a problem. Because the closer Washington stood to the Shah, the more many Iranians began to link America to everything they hated about his rule. So when opposition to the Shah grew, anti-American feeling grew with it. America may have thought it had a loyal ally, but in the eyes of millions of Iranians, it was becoming associated with foreign control, humiliation, and dictatorship. And by the late 1970s, the ground under the Shah was shaking. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah. This was not a small political transition. It was a total transformation of the state, the ideology, and the country's relationship with the world. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini emerged as the central revolutionary figure. And unlike the Shah, Khomeini did not see America as a friend. He saw it as the power that had corrupted Iran, protected tyranny, interfered in Iranian affairs, and helped overthrow Mossadegh. The revolution did not just remove a ruler, it overturned the whole foundation of the US-Iran partnership. One world disappeared. Another one was born. For the revolutionaries, the United States was no longer a protector. It was the great Satan. For Washington, Iran was no longer a trusted ally. It was becoming a revolutionary state hostile to American influence. This was the moment the old friendship truly died. But even then, relations might still have been repaired. The anger was real, the mistrust was deep, but history still had one more blow to deliver. And that blow came at the American embassy in Tehran. On November 4th, 1979, Iranian students seized the US embassy in Tehran and took more than 50 Americans hostage. According to the US Office of the Historian, they were held for 444 days. To Americans, this was national humiliation. To the revolutionary students and many of their supporters, it was revenge, protection, and symbolic justice. They believed the embassy was not just a diplomatic compound, but a center of interference. This is one of the most painful truths in the whole story. Americans remembered innocent diplomats taken hostage. Iranians remembered a foreign-backed coup and decades of interference. Each side believed history justified its fear, and when two nations feel wounded at the same time, reconciliation becomes very hard. The hostage crisis destroyed any remaining trust. It crippled President Jimmy Carter politically. It shocked the American public. It hardened attitudes in Washington, and it pushed the relationship from crisis into open hostility. Soon after, diplomatic ties were severed, US sanctions, which remain a major feature of the relationship to this day, trace back to the embassy seizure and the crisis that followed. The State Department's sanctions background explicitly ties US restrictions on Iran back to 1979 and the seizure of the embassy. This is the turning point where disagreement became enmity. Not competition, not tension, enmity. And once enemies are born, every new event is interpreted through suspicion. After the hostages were finally released, the relationship never returned to normal. There were moments when the temperature dropped. There were periods of indirect contact. There were secret messages, negotiations, and occasional openings. But the core distrust remained. Why? Because the conflict was no longer about one single event. It had layers. Iran believed the United States had overthrown its democracy, backed an unpopular ruler, imposed pressure, and treated Iran as a nation to be controlled. The United States believed Iran had seized its diplomats, supported armed groups across the Middle East, threatened US allies, and pursued dangerous capabilities under a revolutionary ideology. Both narratives became stronger over time, and then came the next phase: sanctions, proxy struggle, and the nuclear dispute. US sanctions expanded over the years, becoming a central tool of American policy toward Iran. Washington used them to pressure Tehran over the hostage crisis, support for militant groups, missile activity, and later its nuclear program. Iran, in turn, saw sanctions not just as policy, but as punishment and economic warfare. At the same time, the two countries clashed indirectly across the region. Lebanon, Iraq, the Gulf, Syria, Yemen, not always face-to-face, but through allies, militias, intelligence, arms, and influence. This is why US-Iran relations became so dangerous. The hostility was not frozen in the past. It kept reproducing itself in new places, and every generation inherited the anger of the last one. Then came the issue that turned long distrust into global alarm: Iran's nuclear program. For Iran, the argument has long been that it has the right to nuclear technology, including enrichment, under international frameworks, as long as the program remains peaceful. For the United States and many of its partners, the fear has been that enrichment and nuclear infrastructure could move Iran closer to a weapon, or give it the power to threaten the region from a much stronger position. That fear shaped everything. Sanctions grew tighter, negotiations became more urgent, military options were discussed again and again. The nuclear issue mattered not only because of bombs, but because of what it represented: trust. Could Iran be trusted? Could America be trusted? Could any agreement survive the hatred built over decades? Those questions hung over every negotiation, and even when diplomacy made progress, suspicion was always waiting in the room. As of April 2026, that issue remains at the center of the latest fighting. Reuters reports that in the failed recent talks, the United States demanded an end to all uranium enrichment, dismantling of major enrichment facilities, and transfer of highly enriched uranium, while Iran rejected those terms. That tells you something important. The old argument is still alive. The crisis has changed shape many times, but the core dispute remains unresolved. For many years, the US and Iran fought in shadows. Through sanctions, through cyber operations, through regional allies, through assassinations and covert pressure, through military signaling. But in 2026, the conflict crossed into something more direct.
Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. Now, let's continue.
According to a report published April 12, 2026, the current war began after President Donald Trump launched the war along with Israel on February 28, 2026. Reuters also reports that the conflict has now lasted more than 6 weeks, killed thousands, roiled the global economy, and disrupted oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. And this is not a minor flare-up. This is the most dangerous stage in years. April 7th, 2026. With Pakistan helping mediate, the arrangement depended on Iran pausing its blockade of oil and gas supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. Israel also agreed to suspend bombing under that arrangement, but the ceasefire did not solve the underlying conflict. Talks in Islamabad then failed to produce a deal. The United States announced a blockade targeting maritime traffic entering and exiting Iranian ports. If this war continues, it may reshape alliances, energy routes, defense partnerships, and how countries around Iran calculate their future. Even if open fighting slows down, the political map of the region may not return to what it was before. But here is the deeper truth. The future will not be decided only by missiles or diplomacy. It will be decided by history, because history is what brought these two countries here. The coup of 1953, the alliance with the Shah, the revolution of 1979, the hostage crisis, the sanctions, the nuclear dispute, the proxy wars, and now direct conflict. Every phase built the next one. Every wound stayed open, and every side taught its people a story about the other. America taught generations to see Iran as a dangerous revolutionary threat. Iran taught generations to see America as the foreign power that interferes, punishes, and dominates. And once those stories become part of national identity, peace becomes more than an agreement. It becomes a battle against memory.
Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. Now, let's continue.
So how did America and Iran go from friendship to hatred? They did not change overnight. They broke slowly, first through interference, then through power, then through revolution, then through humiliation, then through retaliation, then through decades of fear. And now the world is watching the result. A friendship that turned into one of the most bitter rivalries of modern history. And this is only the beginning of the story, because in part 2 we go deeper into the years after 1979, the sanctions, the shadow war, the militias, the Gulf confrontations, the nuclear standoff, and how both countries spent decades preparing for the kind of conflict we are now seeing. After the hostage crisis on November 4th, 1979, the relationship between United States and Iran did not heal. Instead, sanctions began to shape everything. The US restricted Iran's oil sales, blocked banks, and cut trade. Life became harder for ordinary people. Prices rose, jobs fell. Iran saw this as pressure and punishment, not policy. And the more pressure grew, the more resistance followed. Direct war was too dangerous, so both sides fought indirectly. They brought in proxy like Hezbollah, Houthis. US used Israel, Saudi Arabia, which were their allies. The conflict spread across places like Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Groups were supported, weapons were supplied, and influence became power. Iran and United States never faced each other directly, but their presence was everywhere. These hidden wars made the region unstable and harder to control. The conflict grew more serious when Iran's nuclear program became global concern. Iran said it was peaceful, but the United States feared it could lead to weapons. Sanctions increased. Talks began and failed many times. Trust was weak on both sides. Each deal felt temporary, and each failure brought the world closer to danger, where diplomacy could collapse at any moment. For years, the fight stayed in the shadows, but slowly it became more open. Attacks, threats, and military moves increased. The line between indirect and direct conflict began to fade. Pressure built over time until it could not hold anymore. Now the tension is visible to the world. The conflict is no longer hidden, and every move carries serious risk of escalation. Now everything stands at a dangerous point. One decision could expand the conflict, while another could calm it. The past has led to this moment, but the future is still unclear. Will this become a larger war or return to silence and pressure? No one knows. And that is what makes this story powerful, because the next move has not happened yet. And now, everything comes full circle. What started as a friendship between United States and Iran slowly turned into distrust, then pressure, then shadow wars, then nuclear fear. And today, it has become something far more dangerous, because the same patterns from history are still happening right now. Sanctions are still being used. Proxies are still fighting across the Middle East. The nuclear argument is still unresolved. Nothing was ever truly solved, it was only delayed. And that is why the recent conflict did not come as a surprise. It was built, step by step, over decades. Every decision from the past led to this moment. The coup of 1953, the revolution of 1979, the hostage crisis, the sanctions, the proxy wars, the failed negotiations, all of it was a slow build-up. And now, with rising military actions, naval tension, and failed talks in 2026, the world is no longer watching a hidden conflict. It is watching it unfold in real time. But here is the most important question. Is this the beginning of a larger war, or just another chapter in a conflict that never truly ends?
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because there are many more powerful stories like this waiting to be told. And don't forget to share this video. You never know who might find it interesting.